Login accepted.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this front-end talk on a big Java conference. Today we're going to discuss some native JavaScript capabilities that give us power to develop apps outside of frameworks, so that we know frameworks that have their great advantages, some disadvantages. But here in this talk, I'm going to focus on creating a web app using no frameworks, but standard JavaScript tooling, which is like Webpack, build tools that we get with setup of a standard framework. But what you can get out of this talk is also a way to create things that work between frameworks in your organization. So let's dive into it. As for this presentation, you can get slides and code on bit.ly no framework app. It's also on my GitHub, which is my last name if you have some of your guides there. So yeah, let's do it. As for why, as I mentioned, frameworks are great, but sometimes we want to have some inter-framework compatibility. We want to develop some native things that are lighter, because, well, bundling frameworks is heavy. And when you want to ship an app to an Asia or rural areas, these things matter. And even if you gzip an app now, still those apps are heavy. And maybe you are in a position when you have to think about that. If not, I think you still can learn a lot about how frameworks work and how your typical JavaScript project is structured. As for me, I do this at a company called Ardigen. If you want to talk about some genomics and data analysis, feel free to catch me after the talk. I do visualizations for data research, for genomics. This requires a lot of speed in our front ends. That's why I sometimes go down to the native features so I can visualize data better. So yeah, today, practical examples, some useful features. I'm not going to live code everything, but we're going to go through some interesting examples. So for use cases of what I'm going to show you, we're going to create the whole app, but you can learn how to create component libraries. So if you have in your organization, if you have implementations using different frameworks, some, all the jQuery apps, Angular, React, Vue, you can create component libraries using web components that can work between those frameworks. Also, if your organization, and many of our organizations are, in a process of migrating to a newer framework, or you want your organization to migrate to a newer framework, but no one wants to say yes because it's a development effort and you're stuck in an old framework, you can actually start writing new features in web components because they work in every JavaScript engine, and then you can end up with an application that is using native web components, and then just switching framework would be an easy thing to do. You can use it to create decoupled view-only components because you are not using a framework. There is the dynamic features of JavaScript are a little bit constrained. You can create pure presentation components. Also, as I mentioned, framework migrations. And even big companies are using web components now to create their whole web ecosystems. Examples are plenty, but I saw that a few months ago, Electronic Arts said that basically every web service they have now uses web components, and they have like hundreds of different web apps in their ecosystem. As for frameworks, I want to talk about good stuff, just so we have a base of what I want to show you here. So component-based approach is a must now. Structure of a project, so you do not have to introduce junior developers all the time to how things work. Standard way to follow, so you can send someone documentation or a tutorial that is going to tell them how to do things. Another thing is that for frameworks, you usually do not need veterans that know everything about language. They just need to know how to do some things in a framework. You have a lot of libraries, a lot of ready-to-use code. Also, if you have a framework, a lot of support, Stack Overflow, and also one thing that actually started this whole framework journey for JavaScript developers was data binding. You know, this thing when you type something in and the app reacts. Web was very static before that, and several years ago when Angular 1 came in, data binding was something that encouraged everyone to use it. As for bad stuff, as I mentioned, these are heavy CPU and size. Even though they are supported by big organizations, they get outdated, change. You have to update them, and platform features really transpire. And one bad example is AngularJS, Angular 1, that actually the support dropped. And right now I'm actually maintaining one AngularJS application. And to survive in this ecosystem, I'm actually using some web components. As for frameworks, you cannot reuse code across them. So right now we have, on backend, we have microservices, and they communicate with each other. There's a concept of micro frontends in the browser, but this is still a heavy and doesn't work that well. So to have some more flexibility on development, you are really constrained to one framework. You cannot just encapsulate things in different apps. Maybe web components can help a little bit with that. And also, you become a master of one framework, not the language. You know, if you code in React or Angular or anything else, if you see the code from the other framework, yikes! It's not something that you can easily understand. You have to learn things from the beginning. Is JavaScript ready for this kind of development? I think it is. It just needs a little bit more popularity, but as you can see, big organizations are now using it. When I was first writing this talk some time ago, it wasn't so popular, but right now an adoption is really, really wide. And by adoption, I mean developer usage. The features are supported right now in like 97% of browsers, so you're good to go. Web components is a basic technology we're gonna use, so if you want to do some more reading, just Google web components. First feature we're going to implement is going to be routing. I'm going to do a native implementation, which is just 10 lines of code, but I would encourage you to use a ready-to-use package in your own project. Data binding is hard in native JS, and basically you have to still write events, and that's not very pretty. But if you create a web component and you use it from another framework, you actually can react to attribute changes, which I'm going to show to you. Libraries, encouraging. OK, as a base for our project, as a boilerplate, we're going to use Webpack to package everything, Webpack dev server to live reload our code, and then Babel to transpile to older browsers if you still have to support IE or whatever. OK, right now I'm going to do some live coding. Mr. Camera, I'm sitting. And yeah, let's do it. All right, so as for the basic setup, I'm going to follow a little bit my guide that's on GitHub. Let's make things a little bit larger. All right. So what we're going to do is just create a new directory. We're going to follow a little bit what you would do with your framework setup. It takes a little bit longer, but actually, if you count installing libraries for your framework, it might take the same amount of time. So let's do a folder. First thing, we want to initialize our npm project, so we do npm init. OK, all default values, we don't need a lot. And when you go to the folder, we don't have anything there. We're going to have just a package.json file. And so let's install packages. Not to bore you, I'm going to copy this code. We need Webpack. It's going to bundle, if you're not that familiar, it's going to bundle everything that we have in one script or several scripts. And to enable building, we're going to add a command to package.json. And then we need some plugins. So these usually are added by your framework, but not that many packages are needed. And we need a webpack config. So let me tell you what it actually does. Okay. So as for webpack config, we have several things here. First, we use module. We use rule that's going to minimize our HTML files. This is just for production use. I'm going to probably show you code, so I'm going to comment that out. And another plugin is HTML Webpack plugin. We basically are allowed, because of this plugin, we're going to hold our index.html with our JavaScript files, and it's just going to be copied to our distribution directory. Just some boilerplate. Well, no one loves that, but let's do that. Next thing, we need Webpack dev server for live reloading. So when you save a file, you can actually see your changes right away. And I actually encourage you to use Babel for transpiling to older JavaScript code. Let's make this bigger. So we need another rule for Webpack for this. Okay. Actually didn't. Okay, let's add this rule for Babel loader. And if you use images and want to keep them in source folder as well, just add this rule as well. We won't need that today. As for package.json, I did overwrite the file, so let's do it one more time. The script for start is going to be webpack dev server. And actually, what we need for it to work is few options. I'm going to add those to README, but this is with the new version, so I'm going to explain those options later on. All right, so this is a setup. That was probably boring. We needed to install some packages, but let's actually do some coding. So first thing that we need for our application is some entry point. So let's make our source file, source folder, and then in the source folder we need index.html as our entry point, and our JavaScript entry point index.js. So for index.html, I'm going to need a really simple structure. So just a boilerplate HTML file document, and we're going to need. Okay, we don't need that now. We're going to need a div that's going to basically render our application. So once we have that, let's test this up. So let's do npm start. Okay, we have a green text, so let's see what's going on. Okay, our empty app is rendered, and basically how it should. So basically, if we now change some files, okay, this won't render, or will it? I'm going to do it with JavaScript in a second, but basically this is going to watch for JavaScript files, and if they change, it's going to rebuild our application. And so as for how do you modify DOM with JavaScript, you just alter inner.html. So let's do that. Document, we select an element with ID up, and then we do whatever, right? Okay, and now we have our first thing happening with JavaScript. That's a bad hello world, but we're going to roll to more complicated things really quickly. So First thing that we need is some header or something, and usually we create a component for that. So let's actually do components. I'm also going to need folders for views, which will be components that render pages. And we're also going to connect to some APIs, so I'm going to create a folder called services. For components, let's start with header component. And right now I'm going to show you what web component is, how that works, and how you can use it. So we're going to first define a template for our component. And this has to be a common variable. For syntax annotation, in the README, I have linked an extension for Visual Studio Code. There are extensions for other IDEs that basically gives me syntax highlighting, even though I'm just writing a string. If you're really sensitive to not writing semicolons, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm not going to do this today. We don't have that much time. But let's actually try to make a header. So if you want to make a header, I'm just going to do a really simple code. And let's have an application name here. If you need styling, just include a style tag with your component code. Okay. And our nav is going to have some simple width. Okay, let's actually... Yeah, I have fire with coding. Okay, I didn't notice that. We were messing around at work and we said that our code is on fire, so every time I type, there's fire. That's a little bit cringy. Yeah. I'm going to try to disable it in a second. Yeah, days you feel good about yourself, right? It's actually... and this component is also called like beast mode. So, all right, let's actually do our web component. So I'm going to create a class that's called header, and we need to implement a web component. We need to extend native JavaScript class that's called HTML element. This basically gives us all of the features of JavaScript HTML elements. And there are two methods that you need for this to work. We need constructor. And constructor needs to call super method to set up everything that HTML element has. And also there is connected callback. This is a method that's run after you load HTML. And if you want to load some new data or render anything that's dependent on external sources, please do it here. It's equivalent of what you have in frameworks. If you're written in any like Angular or Vue, you also have constructor, and also there is like ng on in it, or computed or loaded. There are also all different callbacks that follow this rule. What we want to do here is in constructor, we want to basically just render our template in our element. And one last step to define your web component, your custom element, is to register it. So what you need to do is the window, custom elements, define. And define takes the name of a tag. One rule here, you need to use dash in the name of an element, because original HTML specification doesn't allow tags that use dashes. So when browser parses your code and sees a dash, it looks for custom element. And also you need to pass a class that defines this element. To make our life easier a little bit, I'm going to export a tag that allows us to render this element. and why you're going to see in a minute. All right, so this is our first HTML element. Doesn't do much, renders, and has a possibility to manipulate stuff, but this is just a boilerplate. So let's actually create also encapsulating app component. That's going to be a really easy. I'm just going to copy the code. We're going to just have our main app component. All right. And let's actually try to use our components. So first, let's add our app component, that's even simpler component, to our document. So in index.js, I'm going to import app from app. And as you saw here, we exported our tag here as a default export. And that's only so I can dynamically render this element in our app. Let's do this. Nothing should change. So let's check if it works. Application. Okay, it renders. So right now we have custom element used. And if you go to the source code, you actually can see that, or you can't, that our div is now filled with app-main component. So just to make things a little bit less confusing, I just assigned import here, but you would actually get the same if you just wrote the tag here and rendered it inside your main application div. That's just a shortcut I like to use, and it really works for routing. So let's try to import our header and see how that works. So I'm going to import header component. Okay. I want big letters to differentiate those. So again, you can do it two ways. So either you use a tag if you know it. This is your custom element. We have application name, header. Or you can use the way I showed you, which is just pass what we imported. So if someone changes the tag name in the component, you can actually you don't have to change this in your code. So that's basic component usage. Right now, if you want to have a single-page application, it would be nice to have some routing and actually have some pages. So let's create those. I'm going to copy our app component to views. And what we need for pages, let's have just an H2 as it's say something else. So it will be a home page. Okay, so this is just our one-page component, and we're going to create, let's call it home. And we also could use some other page. All right, and now how to do routing. So, and this is really easy. The first implementation of router is going to be like 5 lines of code. So let's do that. So for routing, we need two things, actually, a function that handles it and a definition of routes we want to render. So, so when we do, let's define our routes. And we can have home. And for home, I would like to use, okay, this is not IntelliSense I wanted to use. Okay, we wanted to have home. And for other page, let's use other. Okay, I'm not going to fall into this trap again. All right, so this is our routing definition. And let's create a function that actually dispatches our routes. So I'm going to have a function called init. And it's going to take a root element, and that is going to be filled with what we want to route to. So let's do an export first. I'm going to export routes in case we need those, and also init. So another JavaScript file can use initialize a router. So basic thing we want to do is basically, this of course doesn't have error handling, but what we can do is just take our routes dictionary that we have right now and find an entry that matches our path that leads to our application. Okay, that's basically it. So let's go to our app component and use this router. Okay. So let's have some div that's going to contain our page's content. I'm going to give it an ID of router outlet. So if you're, we all know JavaScript jokes that say, what is this in this context? So this in custom elements class is on the top level is always the element. So native HTML API works here. And every element, starting with document, has a query selector and those inner HTML properties. So I'm going to select our router outlet. And it's going to be our root element. And let's actually init our router. Okay, does that work? Right. Right. You're right. Yeah, I did. Thanks. Good catch. All right. Let's see that. Header with home. Exports up home. Okay, right. Good, thanks. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we still have some undefined for home. Okay. Okay, yeah, we have other. Thanks. But we need one last thing. It seems that our we get undefined here. Okay, let's don't have errors here. So let's actually, okay, this shouldn't be href, this should be path name. All right, routing works. Let's see how going to other works. Okay, it works, but it requires refreshing the page, so we still did not reach our goal of having a single page application. For that, I'm going to use some tricks, so we're going to reach 10 lines if in our init function. This is not a complicated code, but I'm still going to encourage you to use ready-to-use router from some package. I'm going to copy those lines and go through those, not to make any errors. So let's go back to our init function, and we have several things going on. So let's start at the bottom on window on pop state. Here we are implementing an event that happens when you go back in the browser. So basically, when your browser history is a stack, so you can pop from it. So if you pop a route from the stack, we basically want our application to reload just the component that renders a page we want. And then the other logic is I'm going to start with actually implementing UI for it, and then tell you what it does. So let's go to header.js, and we want to have links to our home now, and to home, and also to our other element. Okay, so now our router works. So if you go to home, it works. If you go to other, it works. And now, just coming back to the thing I didn't explain at the beginning, if we go to package.json, we have history API fallback option in Webpack Dev Server. What it does, it basically allows us to use routing this way. So it redirects all of the routes to index.html. Usually, even if you use a standard framework, you still have to make sure that routing is done well. So you need to redirect everything to index.html apart from 404. So the routing works. That's an explanation for that. But let's come back to header. We have those links. So how to make them reload our pages without refreshing the page? I'm going to add something to identify those links. So I'm going to use a router link attribute that is a flag, and basically in our router we have this new part of code. So what we're going to do is we're selecting all of the links that have router link attribute, and then we attach an event listener to every of those links. So it does things we want, not what browser wants. So basically, we prevent default redirect. Then we get a path that this link wants to lead to, and then we basically use our routes dictionary to redirect and fill our element with the location content that we want. And then, of course, we prevented default action from the browser, so we have to push our route to the browser history. So we have that now, and right now we can go between pages without reloading. So that's one feature that frameworks give us, and we now implement it ourselves. Not really needed, but I wanted everyone to see that, so we understand how those things work. And for basic applications, this might work. Of course, you need to parse some parameters here. So if you wanted to have some identifiable routes, serve some elements from those routes, you need to implement this. But as I mentioned, I highly encourage you to use some router packages. And so right now, let's do something more interesting. Maybe let's see how we can load things from an external API. And for that, the code is really simple as well. So for services, let's see what's going on here. I'm going to use just a common open API. It contains some posts that you can use for working with your application. And we're going to have a very simple data fetching method. So we're exporting an object with a get method. We can actually call it somewhere, because get is also used in JavaScript as a keyword. So let's get posts. And what we want to do is just use a browser implementation of fetch, then fetch posts. We're going to get JSON from this response and then return those posts. So let's try to use it in our home so we can render some data, assuming it's a blog or whatever. So let's import API. And in connected callback, which is made for this purpose, we're going to call API get posts. And let's make connected callback async so we can await results. Okay, and now we need to render those somehow. So I'm going to, before we create a post component, I'm going to just render those this way. So all right. So a post should have some heading and also some text. Let's render post title here. I just know what's in this API, but we could of course go whole route with reading documentation, but I don't see a point here. And post, yeah, let's actually see, because I don't remember. Let's see what we get from the API. And once we have post body, let's do a line that separates posts, and let's join them so it's one string that we can render. That's just for nice inspection. And we just to render that, we can go with this inner HTML, and just let's append posts to it. Okay, so now we fetched posts from the API. Let's see network inspector so we can see what's how our body looks like. Okay, let's refresh. We have posts. And what we get from this API is body. Okay, let's render body then. Okay, so that's fetching something from an external API. That's something that we actually did in like 3 minutes, which is I think great. You do not need to use heavy boilerplate for that. Fetching data from external APIs used to be easy, and now writing all of those services becomes tedious with frameworks. So you can use that in web components as well. But even if you decide to go with static web components for your application, you still can get a lot of benefits. So, and at the end, I want to go with you through an implementation of a post component that's doing a lot more things. But I'm going to go through code instead of typing that in, so we can have more time to actually discuss this instead of debugging. So I have it prepared. So let me just change a folder. Okay. I have a little bit better styling here in the version that you're going to have also on GitHub. But let's go to other page that I implemented in a little bit different way. What you can see here is I have created a post that can be live updated. So here you can think of it as a post creator. So it renders a title of post and it reacts dynamically to what we type in. And implementation of that is as following. So let's actually go to post component and let's go through the code. So when you want to implement your own web components, you can know the way. So first thing I do is we have an empty h2 and p that's going to be filled with content. And in constructor, I just catch references to those so we can do it only once. The other thing is that let's actually see how this post is rendered. So if we go to other page, okay, let's go to home. And the same code we did before with rendering posts, here I do by just passing title as an attribute and body as an attribute. To do that in web component, you actually have to tell your class what attributes you want to observe, and also what I did is I mapped title and body to actual class properties, because, well, implementation of web component is not perfect, so it has attributes and class properties. To actually have a class property that uses an attribute, you have to do some mapping, so do a getter for title that's going to return you the attribute. The same thing is with setting attributes. One note here, if you're going to look at this code, there's also an example of how to emit your custom event. So for live reloading, for what we do here, we have some value changing in the other component, because if you look at the other component, we have a text field here, and this changes, not the post. So while passing this data, JavaScript gives us an option to watch changes, and we have attribute changed callback. And of course, it's a little bit clunky. It's not perfect, so we have to have a switch case and find which attribute was actually changed. And if the title attribute was changed, title attribute of our post, then we just alter text on our component. So that's dynamic rendering. It's a little bit more boilerplate, but if you're in a position where you have to migrate frameworks or you just want to stay independent, that's still going to work. And well, so if I change this to body, we can also alter. Okay, I only mapped title well here, but yeah, that's watching changes. So I'm going to wrap this here. As for takeaways, I think you can do a lot of things using vanilla JS. This is still somehow risky because many people didn't hear about this way of doing things, so you have to send them tutorials. But if you want to, do some of this in your workflow, just create reusable web components. You can just have a single JavaScript files that will register those components. If you liked the talk, please rate it in the application so I can hear how you liked it and what I could improve. And if you go to GitHub, you can actually see some resources where you can go further with this web component development. That's going to be it for me. In several minutes, in like 15 minutes, I'm also presenting a small, quick talk on how to deploy your frontends on GitHub pages for free. It's going to mix deployment and also free continuous integration from GitHub in the form of GitHub Actions. It's in 15 minutes in room 2. So that's it. Thank you for coming and enjoy Web Components.